Hey everyone, it's Michael Kikle. I hope you're doing well today, and I have a video here to talk about how books are too long. Now, this is a topic that has been on my heart for like the last, I want to say 8 years, something like that. There was a YouTube channel that inspired my channel, and I don't mean to riff on so many of the subjects that he brought up. You'll see a lot of them here because they are things that this particular person said many years ago on videos that either inspired a thought in me or were things I agree with that still circle around in my brain to this day. My favorite YouTuber ever that you can't even watch anymore is a fellow named Blows Himself Up Dude. He used to also go by Brown Coat Eric here on YouTube. He's pulled all of his videos down. They're unlisted. You can't watch them. But he was great. He was genuinely one of the best, most intelligent YouTubers out there that actually thought through his opinions. And one of his last videos he made on the channel that I probably watched 50 times because of how it really explained to me what I was thinking. And I know that that sounds like getting your opinions from someone else, but some people have a way of explaining their opinions so much and so well that it really does change your mind on things. And I kind of want to throw this out there because I'm seeing this kind of idea pop up more and more in book communities. It's not just with manga and comics that I really focus on, but just books in general. So, I think books are too long. And more in the recent days, like since like the 80s. I mean, obviously it was around before that, but there's a lot of factors there that I want to talk about a little bit too. But mainly my issue comes in with, I love horror. Like, not so much with comics and manga, but I like horror. That's always been kind of the novel thing I went to as I got into reading heavier when I got into high school. And I really like that. There's other things I've wanted to try out over the years. For example, I have a lot of friends. Most of my guy friends that do read are mainly online. Most of those guys read fantasy, right? Sci-fi too, but mainly fantasy. Fantasy, I think I would like more than sci-fi. That's just my personal opinion of my own taste. But fantasy has the issue of having books that are like 1,000 pages a piece in a series that could have like 20 books sometimes. Then you have the uncompleted series and what may never be completed with people that either go out of print entirely or certain books in the middle of the series going out of print. Then you have to scrounge for that. Or you have people like George R.R. Martin who don't even finish the books. So you may start a series that's newer, and it may never even be finished, you know? And it's not just Martin that's done that. Other people have done that. Other publishers, for that matter, have done that. I think the two biggest symptoms that caused books to become what I consider just straight out bloated, as Blows Himself Up Dude used to put it, essentially are Stephen King and J.R.R. Tolkien. I really firmly think that that is the cause of all of this shit. Stephen King was the influence for thrillers, thriller writers, horror writers, drama and fiction writers. Pretty much all of them wanted to be like him. So they go on to explain literally the whole family history of a family. And I'm not talking like the parents and the grandparents. I'm talking about like people from 300 years ago in the family. Or how the settlers built a house that these people that live in a haunted house have. I don't give a shit about any of that stuff. And the majority of the time with a Stephen King book, for example, those little details don't matter. There are entire chapters you can cut out of, like The Stand, for example, and used to be cut out of The Stand by Stephen King, for example, when it was originally published. Then they were added back in for the 1990s cut of the book, when the miniseries was coming out on TV. And I think it ruins that book, to be honest with you. I don't think the book's that great to begin with, but I really think all the added-in material, like people dying, random people that are barely in the book at all, the randos all over the planet, when the apocalypse starts really kicking in, that stuff just feels so not as detailed or not as important as it should be. You know what I mean? It's not like you're having a character witness it. It's literally like a collection of short stories of people dying from the plague in that situation, Captain Trips, in the middle of the book, right? But then, like, other Stephen King books are like that. I think there's a good half of The Shining, the 600-page book called The Shining, that you could cut out of it. I really firmly believe that. You look at Tolkien. Tolkien did the same thing. It wasn't just about the adventure of Frodo and everybody else. It was looking at the fucking sky, looking at the trees. How do the trees fester? You know what I mean? Like, it just meanders too much. And fantasy in general, from my small amount of exposure to novels of fan fiction, have been like that, and I can't stand it. Yes, I prefer thriller and horror that takes place in our reality, not some fantasy world, but my point is, I can't even bring myself to experience trying to test out an interest in fantasy when it comes to novels. I'm not talking comics and manga. I try those all the time. And I like those, depending on what it is, especially like Berserk from Japan. But like, I've always wanted to try Brandon Sanderson, right? And I've heard like his books typically have an arc that goes over many books, like a trilogy at a time sometimes. You look at like Mistborn and stuff. I cannot see myself reading a 1,000-page book for part of a story, part of a trilogy. I just can't. I just can't do it. I don't know. It just doesn't feel right to me. I can't get invested in that, especially all these years later, where like newer books in the series that he puts out, people trash. So the investment seems less and less of an interest to me, despite what people say about the earlier books. It's kind of like with TV shows. I'm getting to the point in my life that if I hit a bad season of a TV show, that I give it like 2 or 3 episodes and then I'm done. Like, I either drop the show entirely, or I look a summary up, or I start skipping, or whatever. If it's an anthology show, I start looking up lists for what the best episodes were, or I just kind of hold my breath and deal with it for the episode or so. But that happens a lot. And I've, with books, I'm way more willing to DNF it, like I did with Dune, for example. I couldn't get into Dune at all. I tried. I got like 100 pages in, and I was like, nah, I'm done. It's not a story for me. I get why people like it so much. I get how it influences things like Star Wars, but just not for me, right? And that's fine. That's okay. Not everything has to be tailored to my interest. Fantasy, and again, a lot of people who are influenced by Stephen King when it comes to like horror and whatnot, especially nowadays, it seems like to me writers are even more influenced by Stephen King now than they ever were in the older days, like the 90s and the 2000s. It seems like everybody wants to write the next great horror book, but horror doesn't sell anymore unless they just put out shitty art house horror A24 types of trash at like Barnes & Noble, right? That's what's promoted now as horror books, and it's not really horror, you know? Thriller isn't really the gory thrillers I grew up on as a teen. Like Richard Lehman books and stuff. I know that's splatterpunk, but still. But the page counts are ridiculous on some of these books. I've seen people, authors, on Q&As and stuff on YouTube, talk about how they had a quote-unquote fast-paced 800-page thriller. If you're writing like a James Patterson thriller, it is not fast at 500 pages, nor 600 pages, sometimes not even at 400 pages is the pacing that great. There is no way that it's fast-paced at 800. I'd bet money on it it's not. And I blame the publishers a lot for this, because they looked at Stephen King, they looked at Tolkien, and they said, you know what, people like chubby. They like a bloat. Write about literally everything around you, every scent, every crunch of the leaves under the characters' feet. Write all of it. Write every detail of their clothing. And again, that's fine for fantasy to an extent, but it's not for thriller and horror. It's just not to me. I cannot name you how many books I've seen that are ridiculous. And like for me, I think a good thriller needs no more than 200 or 300 pages. 350 max. I really firmly believe that from what I've experienced. And it's gotten to a point that books are so damn expensive that I refuse to try out anything. Yes, libraries exist. Yeah, you can try out things like the Witcher books, which aren't that long. That's kind of nice. Or like the Brandon Sanderson stuff, because it's popular enough that you can probably get a copy at the library. That's not the point, though. The point is, if I want to try out other people that the library doesn't have, or that they can't take a request for, the books are so damn expensive, which I need to make a video on that too. I'm not paying $20 for a paperback. I might as well buy a hardcover, and I don't even like hardcovers. But I'm not paying for a gigantic-ass paperback for $20. I'm not doing that. Especially when I know the book's not that good, the pacing is dead because it's 800 pages. I mean, damn, even like a 300-page Stephen King book that's in those tall paperbacks are still $20. It's not worth the money. It's not. And it's not worth the time investment the majority of the time either. And it's sad because I like to read. I do. I love comics. I love manga. I'm starting to experience a little bit of experiment a little bit with, like, I know this is going to be crazy, but I talked to my wife since she loves, she's getting into thrillers. And she loves romance anyway, and dark romance sometimes. I recommended the Harley Quinn publisher to her because they're still at Walmart. They're like $6 a book. They're 220 pages max. Sometimes they have like a double book, kind of like the old Ace doubles. I talked her into trying them out. She absolutely loves them. You can go to Goodwill, and we have a really good Goodwill out here, and you can get tons of them. Tons and tons of them. Even if they're in a series, right? Those series, each book is episodic. Typically. I don't know if it's always the case or always has been the case, but that's typically the case. There was one that was more thriller-style book from the Intrigue line of Harley Quinn as a publisher. It was called Stalk Through the Mist by Carla Cassidy. I have it sitting right here on my desk. I tried it out just because the cover looked way better than the other terrible Photoshop covers that you see of the other books, but these are mass market paperbacks. So they're $6 at Walmart, and to this day coming out literally monthly. They put out like 6 or 7 books a month as a publisher from all the different writers. I think each writer has a new book like every month. If you go to Barnes & Noble to get them brand new, like today from this year or this month's release, it's $8. You can't beat that, right? A Lee Child Jack Reacher book is like $20 in paperback. Like, the mass markets are there every once in a while at my Barnes & Noble, but not frequently enough, right? And they're still like $11, probably for a not-so-fast-paced thriller, no matter what anybody tells me, even though I want to try out the Reacher books. Can't bring myself to do it. They look too bloated to me. And again, you could read it and be disproven. Robert McCammon writes thick books, but they're very lean. They're very, very lean and very fast-paced. But I'm annoyed because I picked up that Harley Quinn book, Stalk Through the Mist. I read it like in a week or two, and I really enjoyed it. It was a little bit too much focus on romance, but it's because it's for women and for romance readers. But the kind of thriller mystery aspect to it, I really dug. And it turns out people kind of consider this and lump it into what's called a cozy mystery. I never read a cozy mystery. But I actually bought one at Barnes & Noble for like $9 or $8 as mass market paperback. I have it right here, actually. It's called Murder at the Pumpkin Pageant. Now, trust me, the title's fucking lame, but the book cover is very Halloween-themed, and it looks awesome. I love the cover for it. Haven't read the book, can't recommend it one way or another, but it's 350 pages for a mystery, which is completely fine for me. Again, that's kind of my max. It's a cozy mystery, so I assume it's like, who stole the cookies out of my kitchen? That kind of thing. Maybe some romance thrown in, but I don't mind Hallmarky types of things, right? Like, I love Hallmark Christmas movies for the most part, depending on what we're talking about. It kind of varies, especially with the newer ones. I don't mind that, but I love that Harley Quinn stuck to their guns and were putting out 200-page books, and mainly because Blows Himself Up Dude's video years ago, that's, again, delisted, mentioned a thing called Men's Adventure. And after I experimented with this Harley Quinn book and bought this Halloween book I'm talking about, I started looking into Men's Adventure. And then Razor Fist made a video a few years back called, what was it called? Reject Modernity, Embrace Pulp Heroism, I believe is what the title was. I had never heard of what pulp was actually defined as, and because of Razor Fist's amazing video that I've seen God knows how many times, I tried out Robert E. Howard, which was an old pulp writer who created Conan the Barbarian, and another character that I absolutely love now, Solomon Kane. They were short stories, and they were fantasy. He created the sword and sorcery genre. Dude, Robert E. Howard is the shit, and I can't even get a single book of his at Barnes & Noble now. I've looked around. They used to have them when I was younger, when I was a teen, before the horror section and stuff popped up in Barnes & Noble. But when I looked through sci-fi and fantasy, kind of browsing through it back in the day, I remember seeing Robert E. Howard books in Barnes & Noble. Not anymore, man. I'm going to tell you one thing. If you have not read sword and sorcery old pulps, like Solomon Kane, for example, you should pick up Solomon Kane. Digitally, physically, whatever. you will never go back to regular fantasy. You will never do it because of how lean and beautifully written it is. It's so poetic, and yeah, a lot of that is Robert E. Howard, but it's because he's doing everything he can with these short stories that could be up to 100 pages sometimes, that were published in pulp magazines with other writers. I'm telling you, those Solomon Kane stories are some of the best ones I've ever read, from anybody. I mean, literally anything I've ever read. Books, comics, manga, the stories there, Solomon Kane is a Christian character who gets caught up in killing demons and stuff. Dude, it's phenomenal. The action, the way it's written, there's some brutal shit in there, and it's phenomenal. If you love that kind of thing, if you like horror, Solomon Kane is for you, not just fantasy fans. It was a really good way to dip my toes into fantasy, but not anything like what fantasy has become now that does not interest me at all, with their goofy covers of people looking at mountaintops from fucking, rocky cliffs. You know what I mean? I am so much more into what Robert E. Howard was doing. So what I'm saying is, I started getting dragged into pulps because of Razor Fist and Blows Himself Up Dude bringing up men's adventure books 8 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever it was when his video was up. Because I had never heard of this. We used to put out weekly books from publishers, one of them being Harlequin, who ended up owning one that I'm going to talk about in a minute. I don't know if they still do or not. We used to put out weekly books from ghostwriters writing under a pen name for a series. Many different series, whether it be military-focused, whether it be, ex-cop stories, vigilante stories, whatever, right? And then you had, like, the pulpy people doing, like, sword and sorcery, like Robert E. Howard. You had horror writers like H.P. Lovecraft, who I'm not really a fan of much, but still, you had people doing their own thing. Now, I recently went to Goodwill with my wife so she could find some Harley Quinn books. I found a series that I had partially heard of. I didn't really know if I was correct about what I assumed about it or what I thought I had heard about it. Don Pendleton's The Executioner. I found 6 books of them. 3 of those being a trilogy, kind of back-to-back in the numbering. And these were from, these were books that have been around since the 60s. The Executioner as a series. And what I came to find out that I thought I had heard before, that turned out to be true, these were what The Punisher is totally ripped off from Marvel. And I love The Punisher, so I was like, I'm totally down for this. After I did a small amount of research, I grabbed all 6 books on the shelf, and they were all, I think, releases from the 2000s, right? I grabbed them all, and I just started reading one recently. I don't actually have it sitting right here. I think it's called Freedom Force or something. It has a red and black cover. It takes place in Hawaii. Kind of reminds me of Miami Vice a little bit, but without a buddy cop syndrome to it. The Executioner is just what The Punisher stole from it. It is a guy whose family was killed by the mafia back in the day. He goes on a one-man spree to kill the entire mafia. Over time, the books were bought by Harlequin, sold to Harlequin, whatever. And then they made their own for a long time. I don't know if Gold Eagle, the publisher of this, is underneath them or not, but my point is, Harley Quinn did this for men and women. You had the women Harley Quinn themed stuff, and then you had other publishers underneath them that released things like this for men. And I'm going to tell you, dude, these Executioner books used to come out weekly. If you include all the spin-offs, there's 600 books, right? If you have just the Executioner books, there's over 400, and they just stopped making them, I think, in 2020 or 2022. They have been around since 1958 or 59, somewhere in there, maybe later in the 60s, I can't remember. But they've been around since the 60s. Every week putting out new ones. Over 400 books, right? That's crazy. That's absolutely insane to me. And the one I'm reading, again, is the first one I've ever read. I'm about halfway through. I'm right at about 100 pages in. And it took a little bit to go, but once it hit about page 40 or so, it took off. It is so action-packed. This one's dealing more with nukes than mafia stuff. Hidden nukes and a search for them. But people love Mission Impossible, right? Mission Impossible is known for all the stunts and the impressive filmmaking and whatnot. I don't know so much how people are involved in the story. I'm not really a big fan of Mission Impossible, but point is, all of the action and whatnot that you see people raving about in bigger budget movies now that kind of, to me, is underwhelming. Like, I'm not a John Wick guy. I'm not a Mission Impossible guy. All of the action set pieces, shootouts, all of that stuff are done better in this book that I'm reading from 25 years ago, in 2000, like I said, from this big action franchise. It's done better there than I've ever seen in anything newer, movie-wise, I mean. The pacing is breakneck. The characters are there in a very episodic way. Apparently every book, except for like the small trilogies and stuff they do here and there, are pretty much always standalone. And I gotta tell you, I really, really dig this. Between this and Solomon Kane, and now that Harley Quinn romance thriller mystery thing I read, Stalk Through the Mist, like I said it's called, I'm not even kidding. I don't think I want to go back. Like, I really don't. I love short story collections of horror. I like shorter thriller books and stuff, that kind of thing. Trying out the cozy mysteries may take me somewhere because they're kind of short and nice and mass market, so they're cheap. But dude, I'm not even kidding. The entire publishing industry could be saved by going back to this. Not only because of the customer side of it, of making them cheaper, making them with cheaper paper like pulps used to be printed on, which I think would be smart anyway, but publishers are idiots. The imbeciles who still buy $20 paper bags try to argue about this point all the time and act like we're fools for just wanting cheap entertainment, like Don Pendleton's The Executioner or the Harley Quinn books that my wife seems to like so much. And technically I do too, I would say. But on the other hand, too, of how this could save the publishing industry, think of the younger people like myself who once upon a time wanted to be a writer. When I got into high school, started reading a whole lot, it would have been so much more manageable to me to think that if I had a series that could be ongoing as long as I wanted it to be, or if I just had a first novel or a standalone novel or whatever, a trilogy, quadrilogy, whatever, if I had no restrictions, but I could still get away with publishing it, and mind you, when I was in school, I don't think I ever saw a 200 or 300 page book at Barnes & Noble. Mainly 200 pages is what I'm saying. I don't think I ever saw one in the store when I was a teen in like 2013, 2010. But I'm telling you, it would have been so much easier to conquer trying to tell the kinds of story ideas and stuff I've had in my head for, over a decade now, closing in on 2 decades now. It would have been so much easier to approach those things, and yeah, you can get away with publishing them independently, but the marketing is so not behind them that you can't get it out there. Everything now, with the advancements in the shitty industry, have gone to romantasy, where it has to be fantasy, but with a shit ton of romance. Kind of like Harley Quinn, but not. Right? And I'm not going to buy those or read those, by the way. I'm just not going to do it. I am shocked by the fact that publishers thought it made more sense to make good, succinct writers have to bloat their shit out so much that the books lose all the impact they had. All of the fast pacing and stuff, it's gone now. And sometimes they manage to mimic if it's a good enough writer like Jonathan Mayberry. I've heard Patterson's little side writers can do a lot better with that, who actually write the James Patterson books. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that. But somebody like Mayberry, for example, can write a killer-ass book and have lean pacing. Robert McCammon, who wrote Swan Song and Boy's Life, can write a really big, lean book that every word of it matters, right? But how many authors do you see who can do that? Not many, and I would argue in the fantasy or anything, no matter the genre, I would argue that it's not very common at all, because most people are not wired up to make books like that. They are wired up to make succinct stories, especially in the digital age where we have all these movies the last 100 years, where books have changed because of how movies look and feel and are told, telling their stories. I just think that we need to go back to the pulpy era, or at least these kind of cheaper mass market, throw them away in the grocery store types of books, like The Executioner, like, the Harley Quinn type of things for the romance writers. I feel like as a writer from that side of things, it would be so much easier to approach stories that way. And number two, you would be writing so many more stories that there would be even more work out there for you to earn money from, whether it be from used bookstores if they have a tie to a local author and sell their books new, whether it be from a bigger publisher company like Barnes & Noble, not a publisher, but a company that sells books, bookstore, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, whatever, or local small shops that sell new books, you know what I mean? There would be so much more out there that you could have as a writer, and it's kind of why I think a lot of the careers of current-day shitty comic book writers are still thriving. It's not just because of agenda at Marvel or DC or any of the big publishers. It's not just that. It's that they have so much work out there that it can look like they're productive. It can look like they can get a little bit of money here and there despite comics paying less and less every year. But these novels, from like The Executioner, for example, that whole story is summed up in that book. You don't have to search down a bunch of trade paperbacks like you have to do with comics. You don't have to struggle to get out of print manga like you do with manga. You don't have to do that, you know? And not to get on top of that, but you have old superhero pulps like The Shadow, like Doc Savage, that I haven't even read yet. I have like a couple of volumes of both characters, but they're hard to come by. And The Shadow was the most popular superhero ever when it came out. Batman, to this day, does not get the ratings on his movies, except for The Dark Knight, I would argue. And the popularity in general, and the cultural zeitgeist surrounding him, has nothing close to what The Shadow had back in the day, in like the 30s and 40s. That's how crazy it used to be, and how good these things used to be. To me, it's sad that writers have been beaten into a corner where they have to bloat out their books so much that people like me don't want to read that shit. I just don't even want to come close to it. I think a lot of writers went to the middle grade groups to try to be able to write those shorter books, but now that's blossoming out because of Harry Potter. And Harry Potter's lean and well done, but again, not every writer can accomplish that, you know, with bigger 300, 400 page books. I know 300 used to be like the average when I was a teen for books, but you have to understand, not every story needs to be blossomed out to that. It just doesn't. A great example, I love Christmas. I love Christmas books. I've read a lot of stuff. Like, I read Debbie McComber last year, who's a well-known female writer. Really enjoyed her book. Call Me Mrs. Miracle, I think is what it was. Really enjoyed that. It's part of a big series of those books. There's some like co-written Thomas Kincaid books out there for Christmas time. They're like 200 pages, 250 max. Because they just don't need all that extra story. They don't need all the extra bloat. One of my favorite Christmas books is The Christmas Candle from Max Lucado, of all people, who I'm not even a fan of. It's a great read. It's a genuinely great book, and it's got a good, solid adaptation that adds some cool details here and there as a movie. That book is like 200 pages, or 150, or 180, and it's got a big-ass font on it, so it looks like a bigger book than it actually is. It might as well be a very small novelette. But yeah, I'm bothered with the fact that the publishing industry and writers themselves trying to justify this, they've ruined books. Writers that I love deeply, one of my other favorite horror writers, Brian Keene, can't even get a book into Barnes & Noble. And people try to argue it's because of sales. I refuse to believe that. Brian Keene wrote mass market paperbacks for, I think it was Pinnacle or Leisure. I think it was Leisure Fiction, actually. He would write books like that were, no joke, like 300 pages, and they were phenomenal. Breakneck pacing, solid characters that were not the most incredible things ever, which is another thing to complain about, too. Part of the justification of having these massive books is because Stephen King, with his talent, can write characters that kind of feel samey, like even with his writer characters he constantly does, but he can do enough different to make them feel diverse amongst all the writer characters he's done over the years, including writing himself into the Dark Tower, right? That's justified because Stephen King is a good writer, in my opinion. Despite all of his bloat issues, character writing he's great at. Some of his concepts he can be really great at, right? Not every writer can do that. Most writers are writing characters that feel like the same character for every single book. Dean Koontz, best-selling author, greatest example of this. Most of his characters are the same character in book after book after book with a different name and maybe a different job, and that's it. Maybe they have a dog, maybe they don't. You know what I mean? But it drives me nuts, the fact that books have been ruined out of greed by publishers, but also idiocy of writers not standing up for themselves and just flat out saying, look, my book is going to be ruined if I add another 300 pages to it. That's just the truth, you know? So anyway, it's not a book video complaining about how I don't like to read. That's not the case. I like to read less than I do play video games, watch movies, watch TV. I'm not trying to make books into those things. My problem is books are dying out despite the absolute denial, the total denial of idiots who are willing to pay $20 for a new book. But also from authors and publishers that I see gaslight the fuck out of people like me online, who constantly act like it's just that I don't like to read. No, I just don't like paying ridiculous prices for books that have no real pacing to them, need to be chopped up, need to be chopped down especially, or may have had books that never should have been released to begin with, in my personal opinion. But yeah, that's just my opinion. I think R.L. Stine, one of my favorite writers ever, the guy who created Goosebumps and Fear Street, he is a magnificent example of how the shorter books can be punchier, more well done, and even if they're average, they're better than the majority of things coming out on the market. He is the best example of that, and I think more writers need to go to R.L. Stine and read some of his stuff, even if you don't like the middle-aged, or the middle grade, not middle-aged, Goosebumps stuff. Read something like his YA stuff. Read his Fear Street stuff that's no longer than like 200 pages typically in the old releases and 300 pages on the new ones. Just read it, take some notes, realize I'm right, and let's move on to making the publishing industry better and books better in totality. So anyway, I want to thank Razorfist, I want to thank Blows Himself Up Dude for their encouragement on this video all those years ago. They didn't even know they were doing it. And how they inspired a thought into my brain about the ridiculous nature of what's happened to books and how shitty they've become because of the ridiculous length of them that's never justified at all. So anyway, what are your thoughts on the subject? I'd love to hear all that down below too. Let me know what you think. Are you in agreement? Are you a bigger reader than any of the other hobbies I mentioned? Do you agree with this? If you're older, how do you feel if you were a man especially? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. About going from the pulpier, punchier books like The Executioner to like A Mistborn, for example, and how ridiculously large that is. Do you think somebody like Robert E. Howard does more with his tools and his skills than someone who's writing these massive tomes that drag on and meander and have scene after scene of people just walking from place to place because Tolkien did it? And that's really the excuse. What do you think? If you're a horror fan, pitch in about Stephen King versus other writers like Richard Lehman, Jonathan Mayberry, and Brian Keene. I want to hear everybody's ideas and opinions on this. If you hate me for it, put that down below too. I'd love to sarcastically argue with you. Anyway, thank you guys. God bless you all. Catch you later, and goodbye.